and I want a slightly more serious analysis, a little less childish, of what's happening in the Middle East. What's happening between the West and the East, specifically Iran?
Well, what you started saying is important, and it's not a coincidence, says Jesus Maestro. For example, that the rich don't have ideologies, they have money, and that's a reality. Politics isn't about ideologies. No, politics isn't about ideas. That's one of the big lies that has been built, particularly from the French Revolution until now. Politics is the struggle for power, which is about what one can and cannot do. And the struggle of those who have power to keep it and those who don't have it to get it according to their interests. There are socially cohesive groups that, according to their socioeconomic and cultural circumstances, we can identify as the most disadvantaged, who pursue power for their own or their group's gain, and those deeply rooted in privilege who seek to keep power to maintain those privileges. That's not about right or left. The terms actually date back to the French Revolution, when they were called the mountain and the valley. And later, when the courts were moved to the convocation of the Estates General in Versailles and of generals, they have to separate between supporters of privileges or of the revolution against them and what is placed on the right or the left. So what we're really seeing right now in the Middle East, it's a clear, obvious demonstration that in international terms, those power struggles happen in pursuit of those interests. And right now, there's a situation of socioeconomic or political economic collapse. Rather, of what until now has been the hegemon, the empire, and one of the main strongholds of that hegemon, in the entire area that Halford Mackinder then defined as the geographical pivot of history, which is the entire Middle East region from north to south, Ukraine, the Arabian Peninsula, the whole Persian Gulf, because it is a fundamental point of connection and a political and economic link between East and West. All trade passes through there. The ancient Silk Road, what they now call the Silk Road, which is no longer the Silk Road, from China, and above all, a key point and core of the most important economic element today, which is gas and oil. Having the largest oil reserve in the world, which belongs equally to Qatar and Iran, with its exploitation shared equally. So, is there a plan being developed right now, since 1994, when Netanyahu wrote in his book, Sharing Terrorism, that there were 14 countries that had to either be overthrown or have a coup d'etat to establish like-minded governments to guarantee a greater Israel, a great geopolitical dominance of Israel over the whole region. And they have been falling one after another since the attack on the Twin Towers on September 11, from Afghanistan, Iraq, Sudan, Egypt, Syria, the last one, Iraq in the case of Syria, also putting in power, recognized by Donald Trump, a terrorist, the television now says former terrorist, as if he were a retired throat slasher, and who right now is imposing a regime of terror in Syria, annihilating Christians, Alawites. We're even seeing markets for women now. I say this for those who say no, that we have to go to liberate the women and so on. What is a woman in India in the caste system? Nothing, garbage, worse than that. What is she in Saudi Arabia, where the burqa does exist? In Iran it doesn't. What is she in Qatar or in the United Arab Emirates? We could get into, if you want, the socioeconomic, cultural, and religious circumstances that define Shiism, which is the most permissive branch of Islam, which is the one that prevails. The only country that has that regime, and whose political leader is also the chief cleric, like the Pope, but in this case for Shiism in the world, is Iran. But to answer your question sufficiently, what we have right now is a plan to try to move forward, to take the final step in establishing total and absolute control without any kind of opposition in the area, to the economic interests of a Western elite based on debt, based on industrial and technological corporations, that needs its attack dog, in this case Israel, under the rule of Netanyahu, Ben-Gvir, and the Likud party, consolidating their opposition and eliminating the last stronghold of a sovereign, independent country in the region, Iran.
All right, but I'm going to put myself in the shoes of the average citizen. I'm going to put myself in the shoes of, unfortunately, the average right-wing liberal in Spain. Isn't it a good thing to democratize Iran? Isn't it going to be better for women? Isn't it going to be better for homosexuals who, to this day, are still being hanged?
I'm really surprised by the direction the right is taking in Spain. I've never been, in fact, politically, my organization, or the one I founded, the one that's growing and the one that's currently standing as an alternative outside the state to change things. In Spain, which is Junta Democrática, it was born as opposition to Francoism. I find it interesting that I have to mention Franco right now for these people, when, at the time, legislation was enacted to protect the Sephardic Jews during World War II. Franco said it was fine to help the Jews, but that they had to pass through Spain, like a ray of light through a crystal. That is, no staying and no being here. I'm really surprised by the drift of the Spanish right, of patriotism. Furthermore, it's based on the elements that held Franco's dictatorship together, which were family, association, and Catholicism. However, they are the most pro-Zionist and the strongest defenders of the interests of international Judaism. Politically, with the nationalist aspect, which is Zionism, that exists. And then we see organizations that label themselves as such, that call themselves that, but they really don't do it out of principle or knowledge. When you really look at what's behind these organizations and these platforms, it turns out that what there is money and people with a lot of power. Like in the case of Spain, David Hatchwell, who is the biggest promoter of Zionism in Spain, he's the godfather, for example, of Isabel Díaz Ayuso, and of the line, let's say, that's called the pro-liberal one of the Partido Popular or Vox, organizations like ECOM, which he directly controls, presides over, and leads. As president of the Jewish community, or of the Friends of the Jewish People, of these pro-Zionist organizations, he is one of the 15 biggest donors to Benjamin Netanyahu's campaign. This was published at the time. Of those 15, there's only one Spaniard, and that's him, and he has direct command and direct involvement. Of the three largest espionage companies, private subsidiaries of Mossad in Spain, like Black Cube, Analytics Systems, among others, which are based in Tel Aviv, London, and Madrid. That explains why there is currently a trend on social networks, in the media predominantly, and at the political level, that defend the interests of Israel and adopt this propaganda that makes no sense. What does it mean to democratize? Has the United States ever truly democratized another country or brought the political freedom of 1776 elsewhere? Never. Let's give a practical example that everyone can see. January 3rd, 2026, everyone in Spain, within that group you mentioned, raising their arms, calling for the freedom of Venezuela, because the traitor, the tyrant, the dictator Nicolás Maduro had been overthrown by force in a brutal intelligence and technology operation. It turns out they told us they were going to get rid of Chavismo, but in the end, they're going to take the oil and leave Chavismo behind. Donald Trump acknowledged 24 hours ago that the legitimate, electorally consecrated president for Venezuela is Delcy Rodriguez and the entire Chavista leadership and structure. I'm not laughing because I want this for Venezuela, urban people. I'm just amazed we're still paying attention to this propaganda. And what I said before, if they really care about the freedom of citizens and women, and if mercy must be brought to the annihilation of regimes, even if that means destroying, killing, annihilating millions of people, well, let's start. We're going to be left with less than 3/4 of the world to begin with, and of course, that's where most of them are coming from. Human rights violations where women are treated as garbage, subordinated, and even sold as objects. Like, for example, I repeat Syria because the president of Syria, Jolene Walshara, is received at the United Nations. They give hugs and kisses. Donald Trump gives him a collection. The King of Spain meets with him. They also take a picture, and suddenly he's a fantastic and wonderful guy. Right now, his regime is not only carrying out an ethnic cleansing of Christians and Alawites, and now the Kurds, but we've also seen videos showing that women are being sold in Syria. Anyone can look it up because now he's an ally. And yet the Islamic current, which is the only one that allows interpretation of the Quran, which is Shi'ism, its greatest exponent being the figure of the Ayatollah in Iran, is the main target to be defeated, to be destroyed, to be annihilated, even though they are precisely the ones who allow the coexistence of other religions in Iran. You can be Christian, go to your church, there are churches and many, something you won't find in Saudi Arabia or in Syria or in Qatar or in the United Arab Emirates. You can also freely practice Judaism. Jews are proportionally represented in parliament, which holds elections every 4 years in a Spanish-style system. So, well, it's very difficult to counter all this propaganda that's spread in the media, but does all this help so that in the end people don't see it in a bad light? Which bluntly and in reality is nothing more than a unilateral action with the purpose of defending the interests, in this case, of the United States. No, because the United States really isn't gaining anything here. It's Israel and the economic powers or economic groups behind Israel like the Rothschilds and company.